Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Bree, and today I'm going to talk about the series that I need to finish. So essentially, I'm going to create a video where I'm shaming myself for 15 or 20 minutes. But here we go. So the first series I want to talk about is the one that has been pressing on my mind for the last year, if I'm honest. And it's the series that prompted me to create this entire video. And that series is Strange the Dreamer and its sequel, Muse of Nightmares. So Strange the Dreamer is a beautiful and hefty book about this man named Laszlo whose dream is to discover the lost city of Weep. It's something that a lot of people in this world have either forgotten about or think is a myth, but Laszlo, growing up in the library, has always believed that it's real and still out there. So when a group of travelers come through his village and offer him the opportunity to leave to go to Weep, he takes it. And there's a lot that unfolds at this point. There is dual perspective, but the second perspective doesn't come in until about halfway through the book. So, something that I can't really talk about much because it'll be spoilers. But the second book, Muse of Nightmares, is the final book in this series. It's only a duology. But I have been so intimidated to read these, mainly because with Strange the Dreamer, it's pretty slow and the writing is so poetic that it took me a while to get through it. And it's not because it's bad, but sometimes with the flowery writing, you do kind of have to wade through it and make sure that you're understanding what's happening. So it's not necessarily a full critique of this book, but it's just something that me, as a bona fide slow reader, had a hard time getting through. So it took me probably about a month to read this entirety. So I'm afraid that with Muse of Nightmares, that's going to happen again. But I mean, these books are stunning and I need to finish it. So one of my goals for the end of the year is to finish this book. So that way I can just say, finally read them. The next book on my list of series to finish is Blood Rose Rebellion by Rosalyn Eves. So this is a book that follows 16-year-old Anna, who lives in a society where money and magic go hand in hand. They pretty much run the cities and the areas that Anna lives in. However, despite Anna being into a powerful both money and magic family, she is barren. She has no magic and is kind of looked down as an outcast in her society. Essentially what ends up happening is Anna tries to perform a spell and it goes awry, and she ends up being exiled to Hungary, where she meets with her cousins who start to uncover a plague that is wiping magic from their lives. So it is a historical fiction. It takes place in Hungary and France and real life areas, but there's the whole society and the magic system is very unique. I really, really loved this. I ended up getting an arc of it before it was published, and I want to say it was published probably maybe 2016 or 2017, because that was when I started getting into Bookstagram and how I ended up getting an arc of this. But the cover ended up being beautiful and the premise was interesting, so I bought a hard copy. And then I bought the sequel and then the third book, and I'm pretty sure it was the final book came out, and I just never picked it back up. I think because I was so far removed from the story that I didn't want to read the second one because I couldn't remember what fully happened in it, so I wanted to reread it, and I never did that. And now the third one came out, and I just want to finish with this series because it was very interesting for what it was. And I'm pretty sure, I don't hear much about this author, so I feel like it's super underrated. But if you like historical fiction and you like fantasy and magic and even a little bit of money and secret society stuff, I think this would be a very good pick for someone else. So highly recommend, and hopefully I will also get to this at some point in the near future. The next series that I would like to finish at some point in my life is kind of a throwback, and that is the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo series. I picked up the second book, not the first one, but this is the second book, The Girl Who Played with Fire. So I actually read this series ages and ages ago. I have been living in my own house for 5 years now, and I remember starting this series when I was in high school living with my mom. So we're probably talking over 10 years ago at this point. But I ended up getting the series because the movie was coming out, and this was like the first American movie, not the sequel thing that they made last year, but it was the first movie, and I don't even remember why. I just remember this being so hyped up at the time, and I was like, yeah, I'll give it a shot. So the first book was interesting, but very, very dry. Stieg Larsson is extremely detailed in his books. Oh, you know what? Maybe I should tell you what the book is about if you don't know, because it is kind of older now. But essentially, there is a detective who's trying to solve a murder for, a disappearance of like this wealthy person who had disappeared years and years ago, and he's kind of picking up the cold case. And in order to do that, he ends up hiring Lisbeth Sanders, who is a hacker. Yes, she's a hacker. He ends up hiring the hacker to help try to track down the person who went missing, and it just kind of unfolds from there. Like I said, it's pretty intense and a little dry and very complicated, but the entire series was really good. The Girl Who Played with Fire, I ended up actually, like, it took me so long to get through the first one, and then I read the second one, and I thought it was phenomenal. So then I picked up the third one and read maybe the first 200 pages, and then I just lost interest. I couldn't remember. I think I went back to school or something, or I remember putting it down, and then I just literally years and years and years and years went by, and I just never picked it back up. So if I'm going to read it now, I probably have to read the entire series over again. But it is something that I think it was worth reading all the way through, and I would like to get back to it. So the next series that I would like to finish eventually is the Eragon series. And again, second book of the series, Eldest, because I thought I bought Eragon at a yard sale, and it turned out when I went to open the first page, someone had put the dust jacket cover over another book, and that was like a crime book that had nothing to do with dragons. So I was very upset, and now I have a cover with no Eragon. But anyway, for this purpose, I'm going to show you the second book. But Eragon is a beloved series, or also well hated. I mean, it goes either way. But it's essentially a boy who lives in a world where dragons were once roaming the world, and all the dragons seem to have gone extinct, yet he ends up finding a dragon egg and hatches it and becomes the next generation of dragon riders. Now, the series is very heavily inspired by Lord of the Rings, and that was one of my biggest gripes about the first book, was that I felt like I was sitting through Lord of the Rings all over again. Love Lord of the Rings, but it just seems so familiar to me, which was a pro and a con. By the time I got to the second book, I started this as well, and then lost interest. I think because it's so big, and I was really just trying to get through the series at that time, that I ended up trying the audiobook, but the audiobook was one of the worst experiences I've ever had, because the dragon, I don't know why, but I mean, I guess when you think dragon, maybe like intimidating or something, but I watched the Eragon movie, and her voice is just so soothing, and because it's like telekinetic with him and Eragon, sorry, Saphira and Eragon, I am getting back on track now, but because Eragon and Saphira have this kind of telepathic communication, her voice in the movie is just so like soothing, and it personally for me it worked very well. I think people have gripes with that, but that's not one of mine. When you listen to the audiobook, it's almost like this demonic growling noise, and it's very, very masculine. And it just, the first time I listened to it, I busted out laughing in my car, and I'm like, nope, can't do it anymore. So I put this down, and then never got back, because this book is gigantic. This series as a whole is gigantic, and I just didn't have the patience for it at the time, but I would like to read it eventually. It is a beloved classic at this point, and, you know, just need to get back on that hype train. So the next series that I would like to get to is, I'm pretty sure one that is officially done now and ended with the short story collection, but it is the Star-Touched Queen series by Roshani. And the Star-Touched Stories is the last in the set of books. The first one is the Star-Touched Queen, and it's about a girl who ends up being cursed, and it's about a girl who is supposed to be married off. Her father is the Sultan, I believe, of his country, and he's going to like marry her off, but because she ends up causing so much chaos, they end up exiling her. But instead of being exiled, she ends up in this kind of fantastic world, and then ends up in the underworld where she kind of has to navigate who she is and finding love and fixing the wrongs that her country has done for women. So the first book, I'm still amazed that I'm holding on to this series, to be honest, because I actually unhauled the first and the second book. The second book's a companion. I ended up liking it much more than the first book, but it was just something about the first book where I think it just wasn't enough for me. And maybe it was because it was so heavy on the romance and I was expecting more, but sometimes with the writing, I got very tongue-tied. There would be a lot of beautiful descriptions, but I would have no idea what was going on in the page. So I ended up getting very flustered with it. I think I ended up giving it like a 3 stars. It wasn't my worst rating, but it was just, I had such a hard time continuing to remember what was going on, who was speaking, why things were happening. The best thing about the book was this like weird skeleton camel named Kamala. Maybe it wasn't even a camel, I think it was, but that was my favorite part by far of the book, because it was just, the camel was so snarky and sarcastic, and every time like the main character were talking, they would have a retort. I was like, this is beautiful, I love it. The second book is Crown of Wishes, and that follows the main character Maya, her sister, and it was a much stronger story, and it focused more on the adventure and the magic aspect instead of just the romance. So I thought that was much more put together and interesting, but at the end of the day, I still had a hard time reading through it. However, I got this arc, and I feel awful that I got the arc and I haven't read it yet. And I think there's 3 short stories in here. So I just figured I already made it through the first 2 books. I might as well round out and finish this one. And then worst case scenario, I might end up having maybe either donate it to like my local free little library, maybe giving a giveaway if someone's interested. I don't know. We'll see how it kind of goes, but I feel like I'm not going to hold on to this after I read it, but I need to read it. If anyone has read this short story collection and likes it, please let me know, because like I said, I'm a little weary going into it. Also, I have a really, really hard time reading short stories because for whatever reason, I just always want more. I mean, usually short stories are so fascinating that I'm like, okay, but where's the rest of the story? So we're gonna give it a try, and let me know down below if you have read it. All right, so I think booktube is gonna come for me on this next one, because I'm not sure if I want to finish the series or not. But the next series I'm going to talk about is Stalking Jack the Ripper by Kerri Maniscalco. So Stalking Jack the Ripper follows Audrey Rose, who is interested in the mortician and the cadavers and solving mysteries that are deemed unacceptable for young women to do in her society. Another historical fantasy where you kind of have the strong female characters who would be out of the norm in real world, and they flip things on their head. So with this book in particular, I personally enjoyed the first one. Again, it was a little bit slower and took some weird turns that I wasn't quite expecting in the magical department area. It was it just seemed to come out of nowhere for me. But overall, I thought it was interesting enough, and I actually was really excited to read the second one. I got an arc of the second one, and by the time I read that one, it really seemed like the story was going nowhere. I almost wish that the story had finished at this one and didn't continue with the series. And then I thought maybe that would be it, but the series is still going on. So the reason that this is on my list is because even though I didn't like the second book nearly as much as I liked the first, and the first was still a little subpar for me, my friend and my co-writer, Kate, if you've watched my past video with where we were co-writing, Caitlin has been telling me I should give it another chance, because the third book picked back up, and the last book that has been out, which I think was Capturing the Devil, the last book, it was just released this year, she said was by far her favorite out of the whole series. So with that in mind, and knowing that we typically like the same books, I think I'm going to continue with the series and give it a chance. There might be one more book in the series coming out. To be honest, I don't remember, but I did really like Thomas Criswell, the love interest in here. If I get some more page time with him, it's not terrible, right? So eventually I'm going to finish this, but it's not really high on my priority list just because I don't own the last 2 books because I wasn't expecting to buy the series when I didn't like the second one. The next series that I need to finish is An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir, another extremely popular book on YouTube. This is a series where there are 2 main characters, Leia and Elias. Leia ends up being a slave and Elias is a soldier. Leia and Elias eventually meet because Leia's brother, after being tried for treason, she gets swept up trying to free her brother, and Elias is a soldier for where her brother is kept, and he is starting to think that the path that has been let out for him, being a soldier with no thoughts of his own, isn't quite what he wants. They end up meeting and getting swept under into this rebellion, and the story kind of unfolds from there. That's a really shoddy description of this book, but I promise it's actually really good. I was very nervous going into it because it is so beloved, and sometimes with the hype, especially in the booktube world, you don't really know what you're going to get because sometimes people just cling on to it and love it, but it might be disappointing. However, I was pleasantly surprised. I ended up picking up this book when I did a Bookstagram read-along and absolutely loved it. Like I said, I think I gave it 4 or 5 stars, and I now own both books 2 and 3, and I just kind of forgot that I read them and needed to continue with the series. So there's really no explanation to why I haven't read it. I just didn't pick up the next book. So here we are. The next series that I'm going to talk about is yet another booktube fave and or hate. I've heard pretty much extreme views, nothing in the middle. But that is Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard. So this is very similar to An Ember in the Ashes, where I read the first book and never continued with the series. But Red Queen, if you don't know, is essentially a kind of dystopic fantasy world where you have people who are separated by their blood types. You have silver blood and red bloods. And the red bloods are common folk who have no magic, and the society is led by silver bloods who have money, power, and magic and kind of keep everyone in line. So there's a very skewed dynamic in society. Similar, I would say, to Hunger Games a little bit. The main character ends up getting swept into this world on accident and trying to start a revolution that she didn't anticipate starting. I really liked the first book. It wasn't something, there was a lot of tropes, I think, that have been common to past books, especially, as I said, the Hunger Games. It reminded me a little bit of that and some other dystopic types of books that I have read, but it was nothing terrible, and I actually flew through the book. I own the second one, but I don't own the rest of the series, and it's just, I read it for a reading challenge. There was 6 prompts that I was doing on my Instagram last year, where I was trying to read 6 books that fit those prompts, and this fit one of them. I want to say it was either some kind of like royalty or crown on the cover. I'm pretty sure because that's why I picked it, because there was a crown. But yeah, I want to give this a full chance. I've heard many mixed feelings about this book, but I think I liked it enough that I'm going to continue, and I'm pretty sure it's over now. If my knowledge is correct, I think all the books are out. So eventually you'll probably see this in a reading wrap up, well, the second one, but for now it's gonna keep staring at me and shaming me. So the next series that I'm going to talk about is nothing unfamiliar if you watched my reading wrap up for September, but that is the Sookie Stackhouse books by Charlaine Harris. So I'm not going to talk a lot about these because if you've watched True Blood or read these books, I mean, they've been out around for almost 20 years at this point, but it's a vampire novel where the main character, Sookie, can hear thoughts, and she's always lived with this where she's kind of the outcast of her town because she can hear everyone's thoughts and they all think she's weird. But when a vampire comes to her small town, she can't hear his thoughts and she's intrigued. They end up sparking up a romance, and the story kind of goes on from there. I just read this first one in September, and I'm trying to read the second one in October. But overall, I need to finish it because they've been done for a while and there's no reason I can't. So the next series I'm going to talk about is one that I have really never seen much on BookTube or on Bookstagram, but that is Everland by Wendy Spinelli, and its sequel, Numberland. there is a third and final book called Ozland. But essentially, this series follows these children who, it's another kind of historical retelling fantasy type of thing, but the story takes place in London, and there are a lot of bombs and chaos and diseases that are going around. And essentially there's a main disease that are wiping out adults, so only children are surviving. But at certain points, the children hit a certain age and they are also being wiped out. So civilization is dying off pretty fast. And you have these adults who are trying to figure out a cure, but in order to do that, they're taking children, and their children are never coming back. So the first book is Everland, and it is kind of a Peter Pan inspired retelling. There are very similar characters where you have Hook, and he is kind of like the bad guy. There's also, their names are changed, but they're very similar. Like you have, I'm pretty sure Tinkerbell is like called Bella. There's Gwen, Pete. A lot of the characters are in here, but they are the kids who are trying to get away from being tested and possibly made sicker by Hook and his team. The second book, which is Numberland, I have yet to read, which is why this series is on my list. I know that they end up taking Alice in Wonderland elements into this book, and then Ozland ends up having some Wizard of Oz elements. So I really want to continue because I had nothing wrong with this book. It was cute, it was fun, and very lighthearted. And it's also steampunk, which is not something I really read about a lot, so I was really interested. I'm super curious as to how the Alice in Wonderland and the Wizard of Oz elements come in later, considering that this was so fully Peter Pan that I'm just curious to see how the series continues. But overall, super fascinating ones, and I feel like I just need to get to them too so I can say, I'm done. Another series that I need to desperately finish because I've owned them forever at this point is The City of Glass, The Mortal Instruments, City of Heavenly Fire. The best part about this is the last book of the series and the only one I have to read. I was really trying to get through this series because, I mean, does anyone not know what this book series is about at this point? They've had so many movies and shows and people talking about it and raving about it that I just feel like you have to know what it's about. But if you don't, there are a group of society that are called Shadow Hunters, and they pretty much rule the underground scene where they keep all magical creatures in check, from demons to fairies to werewolves and shapeshifters. Everyone in the society kind of yields to the Shadow Hunters, who keep things in order so that the mundane world does not know or find out about their culture. This book is another hefty one, hence why I put them off. If this whole video is any indication, big books intimidate me, and I'm not afraid to say it. Because the people on BookTube who can read big books and love them, you scare me as well. No, but in all honesty, it takes me so long to read. So sometimes with the books that are bigger than 500, I do put them off more because I just know, for me being a slower reader, it's going to take me a much longer time to get through. And I have a lot of books that are shorter that I'm like, oh, I could just breeze through that one and I'll end up reading more books that month. Obviously, they all equate the same. Like, it doesn't really matter how many books you read in a month. But for me, I just like to be able to absorb more. And because I'm slow, I know I'm going to be able to absorb more than if I get through one hefty bad boy that's going to take me all month to get through. But I have actually been listening more to the audiobooks for this series. It's not my favorite, but it's enjoyable enough where I'm in it for the long haul at this point. I own almost, other than like the spin-offs and the main series, the Mortal Instruments, the Dark Devices, and the the Dark Artifices and the Infernal Devices. Switch those around. I own all of those series, mostly because I found these books at yard sales and Goodwill and flea markets, and I've pretty much bought every single book for $1. So I just bought them all. Eventually, I mean, this is on my list to finish because I have started this series, but those series are ones that I need to start. Maybe I'll do another video where I talk about the series that I want to start. But for now, this is another one that's on my goal. I will finish this series by the end of the year. Mark my words. And if I don't, someone come after me. and tell me I've done wrong. Okay. Alright, so the final series I'm going to talk about that I need to finish is another one that's hit or miss for people, but one that I actually enjoyed, and that is the Magician series by Lev Grossman. I'm not going to hold this thing up the entire time because it's kind of heavy, but these editions are absolutely beautiful, and I love them. So I'm just going to, we'll set them there out of the corner. But anyway, the Magician series follows these older college graduates where they end up finding this magical world, and they're tested, and if they're accepted into the school, they learn how to perform magic. The main character, Quentin, is in love with these childhood books that are all about this magical world named Fillory. And he's always thought that Fillory was just something that an author made up, but while he's studying magic at his school, he finds out that Fillory is a real place, and his school of magic that he's learning at and Fillory kind of collide when there's a mysterious man who kind of comes and turns everything upside down. I don't think that gives anything away. It's also a vague description because there is a lot that happens in this book. I think the main thing that people get turned off for reading the first book is because a lot of people compare it to like the adult Harry Potter or like this magical school setting, and the school setting isn't for the entire book. It's very fast paced. Like you end up doing, I think, 3 or 4 years very combined. It's like half the book. So there's like you're going, and by the halfway you're like, oh, well, we're done with school and now we're in the real world. And you're following Quentin as he's struggling to find his place in the world after doing this magic school and after a very devastating event happens at the school. So I actually liked the first one. I agree that with the masses that it's kind of hard to get through, but I've also heard that books 2 and 3 are well worth the wait. So that's something that I just want to get to and call it a day, because The Magicians is actually one of my favorite TV shows, and I just want more of the world while it's off air, essentially. But alright, there you have it. Those are the books that I need to finish. Let me know if you've read any of these series, and if you've finished them, which ones were your fave, and what should I prioritize on my list to get to before the end of the year. Probably not reading all of them by the end of the year because we only have 2.5 months left. But if there's one you think I really should finish before December 31st comes up, please let me know and I'll try to prioritize that. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.